On a dark and stormy night, in a small Victorian home, the White family sat by the fire. Mr. White and his son Herbert played chess, while Mrs. White knitted peacefully. Then came a knock at the door. Mr. White opened it to find an old friend, Sergeant Major Morris, a soldier with stories of distant lands and strange things. He stepped inside, drenched from the rain, and took a seat by the fire. But it wasn't just stories he carried. It was something far more sinister.
This is the cause of much trouble.
From his coat, he pulled out a shriveled, mummified monkey's paw.
What is it?
Asked Mr. White.
A talisman. A fakir placed a curse upon it. A spell that grants 3 wishes, but at a terrible cost.
3 wishes. But how?
And what happened to the last man who wished?
His 3rd wish was for death.
The Whites laughed uneasily. Surely it was just an old soldier's tale. But Mr. White, intrigued, took the paw despite the warnings.
Go on, father. Wish for something useful. 200 pounds, perhaps.
Mr. White hesitated, then gripped the monkey's paw.
I wish for 200 pounds.
But nothing happened. The monkey's paw lay still. Herbert laughed, calling it nonsense. And soon, after Morris left the house, they all went to bed. In the late afternoon of the next day, a man from Herbert's workplace arrived, with a pale face.
There has been an accident at the factory.
What?
I'm deeply sorry. Herbert was caught in the machinery. He did not survive.
Mrs. White collapsed into sobs. Mr. White, shaking, could barely stand. Then, the messenger reached into his coat and handed them a sum of money.
The company wishes to offer you compensation, 200 pounds.
The exact amount they had wished for. It dawned upon them that Monkey's Paw had granted their wish, but at a terrible price. Days passed. The house was silent and empty. One night, as Mr. White sat in his chair, staring into the dead fireplace, Mrs. White suddenly looked up, her eyes filled with desperate hope.
The paw. We can wish him back.
No, we mustn't.
He was our son. We have to.
Shaking, Mr. White lifted the monkey's paw once more.
I wish my son alive again.
Then, from the silence came a sound. A slow, shuffling step outside. Then bang. A heavy knock at the door.
Herbert.
She ran toward the door, fumbling with the locks.
No, don't open it.
Mr. White, his face pale with terror, fumbled for the monkey's paw, his hands shaking. The door creaked as Mrs. White unlatched the final lock.
I wish him gone.
Herbert.
But the doorstep was empty. There was nothing there. Mrs. White let out a broken cry, collapsing in grief. Mr. White lowered the monkey's paw, knowing he had saved them, but at a cost they would bear forever. The monkey's paw lay still once more. The house was dark, and all that remained was silence.